Imagine a young graduate sitting in a cramped apartment, staring at a job posting for a major state-owned energy firm. On paper, he's the ideal candidate, top of his class, relevant internships, and glowing recommendations. But as he scrolls down to these specific requirements, his heart sinks. The position requires a candidate who graduated in a very specific year from one particular university with a minor in an obscure subfield and, most tellingly, a demonstrated family history of dedication to the industry. In China, they call this Radish Recruitment. It's the art of digging a hole in the bureaucracy that is so precisely shaped. Only one specific radish, usually the child of a high-ranking official, can possibly fit into it. This isn't just a modern glitch in the system, it's the quiet, sophisticated evolution of a haunting ghost from the 1960s. Back then, the bloodline theory was blunt and brutal. If the father is a hero, the son is a brave man. If the father is a reactionary, the son is a scoundrel. Your destiny was written in your father's file before you were even born. We are told those days of revolutionary caste systems are over, replaced by a modern competitive meritocracy. But when you look at the family fiefdoms governing the most lucrative sectors of the economy, finance, telecommunications, and power, the logic feels eerily familiar. What was once an overt political label has transformed into institutional inbreeding, a silent mechanism where public power is treated as a private family asset. It leaves you with a chilling realization. The game isn't just rigged. For many, it ended before it even began. How did a society that once fought to abolish class origins end up creating a neo-bloodline system where your proximity to the center of power is the only resume that truly matters? And what happens to a nation when the ascent through effort becomes nothing more than a carefully maintained illusion?
Right. What you are observing here is the absolute cutting edge of a sociological evolution that has been actively adapting for over 3,000 years. It's definitely not an anomaly. Yeah. And it certainly isn't a failure of the system.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is a highly sophisticated adaptation of elite formation. When you look at any massive maturing institutional architecture, you see this tension playing out. It's the fundamental push and pull between the destiny dictated by your lineage and the ascent you can achieve through pure merit.
Because systems, as they mature, they naturally develop mechanisms to ensure their own continuity, right?
Yes, to maintain stability and to preserve deep generational institutional knowledge. The transition from the overt spoken labels of the mid-20th century to the systemic structural reproduction we see today is an objective, measurable phenomenon of social organization. To truly grasp the mechanics of these modern institutional frameworks, to understand why the radish is shaped the way it is, you have to trace the DNA of this hierarchy all the way back to its ancient origins.
The historical context here is incredibly vivid and honestly quite jarring when you look at the human impact. Let's travel back to a very specific moment in time, Beijing, 1966. This perfectly illustrates the raw, unfiltered application of this ideological blueprint.
It was a very turbulent period.
Yeah. Picture a young student named Lin. Now, Lin was the kind of student you would want to build a nation's future upon. His academic record was entirely flawless. He spent his days meticulously studying complex mathematics and physics, driven by an unwavering dedication to becoming an engineer and contributing to the rapid industrialization of his country. He did everything perfectly according to the rules of merit and effort.
But the rules shifted under his feet.
During the height of the historical events known as the Red August, the entire trajectory of Lin's life was dismantled, literally overnight. And the crucial detail here is that it had absolutely nothing to do with anything Lin himself had done, said, or failed to achieve.
The mechanism of his downfall was entirely inherited.
Right. The sole reason his life was derailed was a line in a biological ledger. His grandfather had once been classified as a small landowner in the countryside decades prior. Under the strict application of the bloodline theory that was prevalent and fiercely enforced at the time, Lin was categorized with a devastating label. He was designated as black scum.
That label was an absolute social death sentence at the time.
Now, contrast his reality with that of his classmates. The children of established revolutionary cadres were automatically hailed as the natural successors of the nation. They were given the prime educational resources, the leadership roles, the pathways to administrative power.
While Lin was completely sidelined.
Sidelined is putting it mildly. Lin was stripped of his academic standing and relegated to manual labor, specifically assigned to cleaning latrines. He was strictly and officially forbidden from pursuing the engineering career he had dedicated his entire young life to preparing for. His complete existence, his potential, and his societal value were reduced to a genetic inheritance.
Political virtue and social status were defined entirely as hereditary traits. It completely overrode any concept of earned achievements or personal capacity.
Which brings us to the deeper roots of this.
Yes, because that specific historical moment, the story of Lin, it represents the most blunt, unvarnished application of an ancient, deeply embedded organizing principle. To comprehend how lineage acts as destiny with such absolute authority, you have to look far past the 1960s. You have to look back to the foundational structures of the Western zoo cultural sphere, which existed roughly 3 millennia ago.
3,000 years is a massive leap back.
But this is where we find the ancient Chinese political system known as Zongfa, or the patriarchal clan system.
Yeah.
This is not just a family tradition. It was the primary codified means of group relations and power stratification for an entire civilization. Zongfa was an intensely intricate framework based entirely on blood relations, and at its absolute unbreakable core was the concept of primogeniture.
Firstborn succession.
Exactly, firstborn succession.
Let's break that down for someone visualizing this society. What does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis for the people living inside that structure?
I want you to imagine a massive, sprawling family tree that doubles as the organizational chart for the entire government. Under Zongfa, the eldest son of the primary consort would inherit the primary title, the vast majority of the wealth, and retain the highest possible rank within that specific branch of the system.
And what about everyone else, the other sons?
The other sons, the younger brothers, or the sons of secondary consorts, they weren't left entirely destitute, but they were systematically stepped down. They would be given titles and land that were strictly one rank lower than the eldest. Then their younger sons would be stepped down another rank, and so on. This created a cascading, infinitely branching pyramid of social standing.
So it was uniformly applied.
Universally applied across all social classes, from the absolute highest royalty down to the local gentry. It was the ultimate stabilizer of social order and political hierarchy. There was no ambiguity whatsoever. Your position, your legal authority, your economic resources, and your social function were completely and permanently determined by your exact, unchangeable coordinate in that family tree.
It essentially hard-coded the social hierarchy into the family structure itself. You didn't need a sprawling, complex legal code to determine who was in charge of a region. You just needed to look at the genealogy records.
And this seamlessly integrated with the actual governance structure of the time, the Fengjian system.
Right, the Fengjian system. How did that operate in tandem with Zongfa?
You can think of the Fengjian system as the macro-political manifestation of the Zongfa family system. Fengjian was a highly decentralized, confederation-like government structure. Yeah. At the very top of the ruling class was the son of heaven, the king or emperor. Below him was the aristocracy.
Noble.
The mechanics of governance worked like this. The king would allocate a specific geographic area of land to a loyal noble, establishing that noble as the absolute ruler of that region. Crucially, the king allowed the noble's title and the domain itself to be legitimately inherited by his descendants, according to the Zongfa rules of primogeniture we just discussed.
So instead of sending a hired professional governor to manage a state, you were essentially franchising the kingdom out to your blood relatives and trusted allies.
Exactly. This created massive numbers of local, highly autonomous dynastic domains. The delegation of supreme authority was based entirely on kinship and affinal relations.
Meaning relations by marriage.
Right. Elite bonds, the very glue that held the civilization together, were forged through blood and marriage, ensuring a continued multi-generational political loyalty. Furthermore, the broader society within these domains was rigidly categorized into 4 distinct occupations.
The traditional 4 classes.
Yes. The Shi, who were the scholar officials or knights at the top of the non-royal ladder, the Gong, the artisans and craftsmen, the Nong, the peasant farmers who made up the bulk of the population, and the Shang, the merchants who, despite potentially having immense wealth, were placed at the absolute bottom of the social prestige ladder.
It's a highly structured, deeply entrenched environment.
Which meant that the rules of social organization and power stratification were codified long before anything resembling modern institutional frameworks or civil service departments ever existed. It was an overwhelmingly agrarian society, vastly spread out and dominated by regional lords whose authority was inextricably, undeniably linked to their lineage.
So the bedrock foundation of the civilization was a strict, unyielding lineage determinism. If you were born a farmer, your grandson was going to be a farmer. But this system, as solid and stabilizing as it was, wasn't static forever. It eventually faced one of the most profound and significant systemic disruptors in all of human history. The introduction of the imperial civil service exam, widely known as the Keju.
The introduction of the Keju radically and permanently altered the architecture of ambition within the society. This wasn't a brief experiment. This system lasted for over 1,300 years. It became the primary state-sponsored method to recruit high-level state bureaucrats and to form the non-official gentry class. The sophistication of this system, especially considering when it was implemented, is truly astonishing.
It wasn't just a simple pass or fail quiz, was it?
It consisted of multiple grueling stages.
Walk us through that gauntlet. What did a young man actually have to do to traverse this new pathway?
It started at the local level with a prefecture-level licensing test. Candidates would compete fiercely just to become the literati, which granted them basic social privileges and exempted them from certain corporal punishments and labor taxes.
Just passing that first level changed your social standing entirely.
If you succeeded there, you progressed to a brutal, multi-day provincial-level qualifying examination. Candidates were locked into tiny individual cells with just a board for a desk and a bed, writing essays on Confucian classics for days on end to become recommended men. Finally, the absolute elite of that group would travel to the imperial capital for a national exam, often overseen by the emperor himself, to become presented scholars. It was the ultimate state-sanctioned mechanism for elite recruitment.
And crucially, the brilliance of the Keju was that it introduced a powerful degree of social mobility, or at the very least, it distributed an immensely powerful perception of social mobility. In theory, commoners, regardless of their bloodline, regardless of whether their ancestors were farmers or artisans, could study the Confucian texts, pass these grueling exams, and ascend to the absolute dizzying heights of elite status.
It was a paradigm shift.
It provided a state-backed, merit-based counterbalance to the strict lineage determinism of the Zongfa system. You no longer had to be born a noble. You could earn your way into the gentry class through rigorous, undeniable individual effort. This completely reshaped how the populace perceived the acquisition of power and prestige.
You've touched on the core genius of the system. The exam was not just an educational test. It was the primary structural pillar of societal stability for over a millennium. It seamlessly integrated the vast populace into the state apparatus by providing a clear, universally understood, rule-based ladder for upward mobility. And the state went to extraordinary lengths to ensure the systemic institutions kept the process as fair and objective as possible.
Right, the anti-cheating mechanisms were centuries ahead of their time.
They were incredibly rigorous.
Right.
When a candidate submitted their essay, clerks would completely transcribe the text into a standard uniform calligraphy before it was ever seen by the grading examiners.
Wow, just to remove handwriting bias.
This prevented an examiner from recognizing a specific student's handwriting or being biased by the elegance of their brushstrokes. There were strict law of avoidance rules that explicitly prevented the children of central government officials from taking exams in the specific geographic locations where their parents held political sway.
So they couldn't just lean on local nepotism.
Now, it is true that significant financial resources were required to prepare a child for these exams, often requiring entire extended clans to pool their wealth to support a promising student, buying books and hiring tutors. But the mere existence of this pathway, the undeniable fact that a poor scholar could become a prime minister, meant that the common citizen perceived the overarching system as a fundamentally fair allocator of elite status. It perfectly balanced the ancient stabilizing forces of lineage with the dynamic modernizing force of pure merit.
Which makes what happened next so incredibly fascinating and so devastating. This delicate balance brings us to a monumental turning point in history, the catastrophic shock of September 1905. After 1,300 years of relying on this exam to organize society, the state suddenly and abruptly abolished the civil service exam entirely.
The abolition of the exam system was a massive seismic event. It was driven by the urgent existential need for rapid modernization. The state was reeling from a series of severe military and geopolitical setbacks, culminating in the stark realities exposed by the Russo-Japanese War. The central government realized that the traditional exam, which focused heavily on classical literature, poetry, and Confucian moral philosophy, was increasingly inadequate.
And adequate for a changing world.
It couldn't generate the highly technical, scientific, and administrative expertise required to navigate a rapidly globalizing, industrialized world. The state urgently needed engineers who could build railroads, scientists who could understand metallurgy, and modern administrators who could manage international trade. So they abolished the old system. However, the sheer abruptness of this abolition instantly destroyed a social equilibrium that had successfully managed a vast population for over a millennium.
To really understand the fallout, to understand why this was a devastating shock and not just a routine administrative update, you have to look at the underlying mechanics of the traditional quota system. The entry-level exams were not based on a sliding scale or a grading curve. They were governed by highly persistent, lumpy quotas set at the prefecture level. Across 262 distinct prefectures, the quotas determining the exact number of candidates who could succeed and enter the elite class were rigidly, mathematically set by the central government.
They were absolute ceilings.
Right. For instance, a prefecture might have a strict quota of 8, 12, 15, or 20 successful candidates allowed per county per exam cycle. And here is the critical part. These numbers did not dynamically fluctuate based on population growth, local economic changes, or the number of applicants. They were a long-standing state simplification, a deeply embedded administrative constant.
And because these numerical quotas were fixed and unchanging for generations, they created a highly localized, deeply predictable economy of ambition. You have to imagine entire families, entire lineages, orienting their intergenerational strategies, their finances, and their daily routines around these specific numbers.
They knew exactly how many spots were available.
When the central government abruptly abolished the exam in 1905, this established, heavily invested, and deeply trusted pathway for upward mobility was severed in a single day. The government did attempt to replace it by establishing a modern, Western-style university and education system. But this new system was inherently far more expensive to attend, geographically concentrated in coastal cities, and therefore vastly more accessible to the already wealthy, established elites,
leaving the rest behind.
For the vast majority of commoners living in the interior provinces, the sacred link between individual effort and political status was suddenly and irrevocably broken.
The societal fallout from breaking that link was immense. We are not just talking about disappointed students. We are talking about the unraveling of an empire. Extensive data directly connects the geography of those specific prefecture-level quotas to the subsequent 1911 revolution, the very revolution that violently ended 2,000 years of continuous imperial rule. The data shows a crystal-clear pattern. In regions with higher historical exam quotas per capita, there were significantly higher probabilities of violent participation in the revolution.
The mechanics of how a canceled test translates into an armed revolution are profound. In geographic areas where the exam system had a historically larger footprint, meaning the state had allocated more quotas per capita, there naturally existed a much larger, denser population of would-be elites.
The ones who were studying.
Yes. These were highly educated, highly ambitious individuals who had invested their entire lives and their families' fortunes into the system. They had oriented their entire existence around the state's promise of merit-based descent. When the system was abolished, this specific, highly capable demographic was instantly disenfranchised. They had the education to organize, the ambition to lead, and suddenly no stake in the preservation of the existing government.
Let's translate the statistics of that disenfranchisement to really show the listener the scale of this.
The quantitative analysis is staggering. A mere one standard deviation increase in the logged quotas per capita within a region implied a massive 6 percentage point higher probability of revolution participation between 1900 and 1906. Furthermore, that exact same statistical increase in historical quotas was directly associated with a 4 percentage point higher probability of early localized armed uprisings during the 1911 revolution itself.
The numbers are undeniable.
The data definitively demonstrates a core sociological reality. The sudden removal of a deeply trusted, institutionalized mechanism for social mobility creates profound, uncontrollable sociopolitical instability. You cannot simply turn off the machinery of ambition without the energy violently redirecting itself.
So, synthesizing this historical journey for a moment, when you look at the ancient Zongfa system of strict bloodline determinism, and then you see the echoing Zongfa-driven bloodline theories of the 1960s from Lin's tragic story of cleaning latrines, and then you place that alongside the 1905 abolition of the meritocratic Keju exam that sparked a revolution, you see a constant, unbroken societal tension. It is a perpetual high-stakes balancing act between lineage destiny and merit-based descent.
It is the ultimate tightrope of governance.
Whenever the pathway of individual effort is closed off, or whenever lineage becomes the sole overwhelming determinant of a citizen's destiny, the structural integrity of the entire civilization is tested.
This deep historical context is not just trivia. It is the absolute prerequisite for understanding the modern institutional landscape we operate in today. The evolution of social hierarchy and elite formation never stops. It merely adapts to new environments and new technological realities. The blunt, overt instruments of the past, like publicly labeling someone black scum, are discarded.
They are too disruptive now.
Exactly. In their place, highly sophisticated, systemic mechanisms emerge. These modern mechanisms are far quieter, but they serve the exact same fundamental organizational purpose, ensuring institutional continuity, maintaining stability, and facilitating elite reproduction.
Which brings us precisely into the modern era, where this quiet evolution is operating at peak efficiency. Let's look at a highly illustrative situation that recently gained massive traction on a social media forum, detailed by a modern graduate named Wang. Wang's story is the modern parallel to the disenfranchised scholars of 1905. Wang had spent years meticulously, rigorously preparing for the modern equivalent of the Keju, the National Civil Service exam. He lived in a tiny apartment, surrounded by stacks of prep books, taking practice tests until his eyes bled. He finally logged on to the recruitment portal and found what appeared to be the absolute perfect opening at a prestigious provincial bureau. It matched his major, his interests, his location perfectly.
On paper, it was his job.
Right. However, as he read the job description, the requirements became bizarrely, impossibly specific. It didn't just ask for a degree in public administration. It required a degree in a highly niche subfield that only a handful of universities even offered. Furthermore, it required an exact physical height parameter.
Which is incredibly specific.
And the final lock on the door, it required a highly obscure professional certification that almost no one in his demographic possessed, and certainly not a recent graduate. This is the textbook, undeniable definition of Radish Recruitment. The hole in the bureaucracy was quite literally pre-carved to perfectly, frictionlessly fit one specific pre-selected radish. As the online sleuths quickly discovered, the position was ultimately smoothly filled by the daughter of a high-ranking official who already operated within that very same provincial bureau.
A flawless execution of the strategy.
Wang's story perfectly highlights how the overt, aggressive discrimination of the 1960s has been entirely replaced by a quiet, highly sophisticated form of institutional networking. It's polite, it follows all the necessary paperwork, but the door is just as locked.
To accurately contextualize Wang's experience and this phenomenon of radish recruitment, you really have to zoom out and look at the broader macroeconomic shift toward modern institutional frameworks over the last few decades. If you look back to the 1980s and 1990s, the system relied heavily on a mechanism known as job assignment.
How did that function?
This was a closed, highly internal process where the state unilaterally identified, allocated, and hired individuals directly out of universities. By its very nature, a closed assignment system is highly susceptible to patronage networks and localized favoritism. Recognizing this vulnerability, and driven by an intense, pragmatic need to modernize the bureaucracy and inject pure, measurable competence into the massive state apparatus, a monumental institutional shift occurred around the year 2000.
The shift to the exam.
Yes. This was the full-scale, nationwide implementation of the National Civil Service Examination, or the NCSE.
And the sheer scale and intent of the NCSE are truly staggering to comprehend. This isn't a small corporate hiring initiative. It was designed from the ground up as an open, highly standardized, rigorously objective system available to essentially any college-educated citizen between the ages of 18 and 35 across a nation of over 1 billion people. It was instituted as a clear, rule-based competition meant to officially and permanently replace overt lineage systems and the old patronage networks with a transparent, modern meritocracy. For you listening to understand the process, it consists of a punishingly rigorous written test that covers logic, data analysis, and policy comprehension, followed by a highly structured, panel-based interview process exclusively for the top scorers.
The foundational principle of all entries via exam became the central, unyielding pillar of state recruitment. The goal was twofold: staff the sprawling government with highly competent tested talent, while simultaneously providing a formalized, unimpeachable ladder of upward mobility for ordinary citizens like Wang.
It sounds perfect on paper.
The NCSE represents a genuinely brilliant institutional evolution. It brought immense standardization to a vastly complex system. However, organizational sociology dictates that alongside any formal standardized system, informal mechanisms will inevitably adapt to operate within, around, and parallel to the new rules. This is particularly true in civil service and massive state-owned enterprises. This adaptation is the phenomenon sociologists refer to as institutional inbreeding.
Institutional inbreeding, that's a strong term.
While the NCSE effectively governs the broad, generalized entry into the standard civil service, the most lucrative and critical monopoly sectors, such as finance, energy, telecommunications, and major transportation infrastructure, often develop sophisticated workarounds to manage their specific recruitment needs.
Because they have specific needs for stability.
Exactly. Radish Recruitment, where job descriptions are meticulously tailor-made with highly specific micro-requirements to fit a pre-selected candidate, is one such mechanism. Another widely utilized mechanism is internal placement, where positions, or pathways to positions, are essentially guaranteed or heavily favored for the children of current, long-standing employees within these specific monopoly industries.
Now, if I'm playing devil's advocate here, this sounds like a complete subversion of the meritocracy the NCSE was supposed to build. These mechanisms effectively act as an invisible, bureaucratic form of hereditary succession. They systematically keep the most lucrative sectors and the most powerful administrative levers securely within established family networks. A single family might have multiple generations controlling the exact same provincial rail department or energy grid,
Which ensures continuity.
but it ensures that despite the existence of highly publicized, formal, meritocratic structures, the absolute core of the institutional wealth and power is preserved and transferred internally. Public power, public utilities, and public resources are effectively managed with the multi-generational continuity and exclusivity of a private family asset.
That is the mechanical reality, yes. But to understand its persistence, you must view it objectively as a highly rational, adaptive strategy for institutional elite formation and stability. By utilizing these highly specific qualifications, the recruitment process technically, legally follows the overarching rules of open competition. The job is posted, applications are taken, but the outcome is safely predetermined.
It checks the boxes.
From an organizational standpoint, this guarantees that the individuals entering these highly complex critical sectors already possess a deep, familial, almost instinctual understanding of the specific institutional culture. They inherently possess pre-established loyalties to the existing leadership structure. In sectors where stability, predictability, and institutional memory are paramount, like managing a national power grid or a state financial apparatus, this form of inbreeding is a highly efficient, though informal way to maintain operational continuity and prevent systemic disruptions.
It's a localized adaptation to preserve function. However, this entire ecosystem of recruitment hasn't operated in a vacuum. Recently, there have been massive, undeniable shifts in how these bureaucracies operate, largely driven by intense, wide-ranging anti-corruption enforcement campaigns. This wasn't just about catching bad actors. It fundamentally, structurally altered the incentive structures and the daily economic realities within the civil service.
The data generated by this period of intense enforcement yields absolutely fascinating insights into the labor market dynamics within a massive bureaucracy. When you alter the compensation structure of an organization, you immediately alter the demographic makeup of who applies. Extensive, rigorous surveys of entry-level civil servants, specifically focusing on those actively pursuing Masters of Public Administration degrees, reveal the profound and largely unintended labor consequences of the anti-corruption drive.
What did the crackdown actually target on the ground?
The crackdown was highly effective in targeting and eliminating informal income streams and the great perks traditionally associated with government positions. Things like lavish banquets, subsidized housing, or untracked bonuses. However, by drastically reducing the total compensation package of a civil service career, the campaign fundamentally altered the demographic and capability profile of the new recruits entering the system.
The numbers here are incredibly revealing, and they paint a picture of basic economics in action. The data clearly shows that the crackdown paradoxically lowered the average measurable ability of newly recruited bureaucrats, while simultaneously and significantly deterring candidates from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Let's look at the exact metrics.
The metrics are clear.
For every one additional senior official investigated for corruption in a given province, the new civil servants recruited from that exact same province in that year reported 22% fewer college leadership activities and 19 to 25% fewer significant measurable achievements in college compared to the broad sample average. The system was suddenly capturing less ambitious, less active candidates.
Furthermore, the vital socioeconomic diversity of the bureaucracy was directly and negatively impacted. The data indicates that one additional high-level investigation in a province in a given year decreased the likelihood of recruiting entry-level civil servants from a lower socioeconomic class from that province by a massive 5 to 9 percentage points.
Just from removing the informal perks.
The mechanics behind this shift are purely rationally economic. Highly capable candidates, the ones with the top scores and the most achievements, possess numerous lucrative options in the private sector. When government compensation drops, they simply go to tech firms or private finance.
They follow the compensation.
Simultaneously, lower-income candidates who urgently require higher total compensation to lift their families out of poverty or pay off debts reacted to the decrease in civil service remuneration by seeking employment outside the government, where the earning ceiling is higher. The effective removal of informal perks drove both the most talented and the most economically vulnerable candidates away.
Leaving who, exactly?
This left a candidate pool that was, on average, less accomplished on paper and vastly more likely to come from an already comfortable middle to upper socioeconomic background where base salary was not an existential concern.
It is a perfect textbook example of how complex institutional ecosystems instantly react to systemic shocks. When you alter the compensation structure, you immediately alter the nature of the radish that applies for the whole. This entire intricate dynamic of networking, compensation, and elite placement is beautifully captured in the career story of an executive named Chen who currently operates within a major state-owned energy firm.
Chen's story is the perfect synthesis of these adaptations.
Chen's career trajectory wasn't just a straight line of promotions based on exam scores. It was driven by a sophisticated mechanism known as reciprocal networking. This is the evolution of the radish. Chen's father was a highly powerful, deeply connected figure in the transportation ministry of one specific province. However, rather than risk the obvious scrutiny of hiring his own son into his own department, Chen's father utilized his lateral connections.
A very smart, insulated move.
He secured Chen a highly lucrative, fast-tracked role in the energy sector of a completely different province. In a seamless, horizontal exchange of favors, the head of that energy bureau subsequently saw his own son placed in a comfortable, high-level post in the transportation ministry back in Chen's home province.
This horizontal exchange is a highly advanced, brilliantly insulated form of elite preservation. It creates a dense, resilient web of mutual obligation and shared interest that spans across completely different ministries and vastly different geographic regions. It is incredibly difficult to regulate because, on paper, two perfectly qualified candidates simply got jobs in different sectors.
It looks completely normal from the outside.
To understand why this is a structural, intended feature rather than an accidental anomaly, you have to examine the core philosophy of the unified Chinese model of governance. This model represents a fundamental, explicit divergence from Western concepts of political organization. It operates on the total unification of politics and administration.
Total unification.
It firmly and explicitly rejects the Western ideal of a politically neutral, strictly administrative civil service. In this model, the ruling party and the state apparatus are inextricably, fundamentally linked. The administrative function is entirely subordinate to and designed to execute overarching political objectives.
So how is a 1.4 billion person organization actually managed on a personnel level with that philosophy? This unification is managed through what is known as the nomenclatura system for cadre personnel management. You can think of this as the most comprehensive, powerful human resources department in human history.
It is unparalleled in scope.
This system meticulously monitors the selection, recruitment, appointment, appraisal, and transfer of core cadres at every single level of government, from a local village chief all the way up to provincial governors. The advancement of these officials relies on a highly dense, carefully calibrated blend of measurable administrative performance and explicit, unwavering political credentials.
The performance metrics within this system dictate the daily behavior and the long-term strategic focus of the entire state apparatus. Officials are continuously evaluated against strict, highly quantifiable targets. These targets are incredibly diverse.
What kind of targets are we talking about?
They include hard economic targets, such as driving the total amount of industrial output in their region or increasing the per capita annual net income of the local peasants. They also include complex social development targets, like the rigorous implementation of social policies, urban development goals, or strict limitations on the number of mass petitions or grievances that reach the central government from their jurisdiction.
So they have to manage the economy and the social peace simultaneously.
Crucially, Alongside these administrative metrics, there are explicit political targets. These include conducting and participating in regular ideological indoctrination, organizing study sessions, and ensuring absolute anti-corruption compliance within their ranks. Promotion within the nomenclatura system requires excelling across all these domains simultaneously. Political loyalty and administrative competence are not viewed as separate, distinct qualities. They are deeply synthesized, inseparable requirements for any form of career mobility.
But the system, for all its ideological strictness, is also deeply, ruthlessly pragmatic. The government is acutely aware of the realities of the modern world. They recognized a severe capacity deficit in their traditional cadre personnel management system, especially when facing the hyper-competitive complexities of a globalized, technology-driven market economy.
The traditional methods simply couldn't move fast enough for the tech sector.
Right. The traditional nomenclatura system, with its necessary but heavy emphasis on decades of political credentials and steady bureaucratic climbing, was simply not fully equipped to rapidly nurture or recruit the highly specialized, bleeding-edge technical talent required to compete internationally in fields like artificial intelligence or advanced material science.
This stark realization led to the strategic, targeted injection of pure merit into the system. Initiatives like the National Recruitment Program of Global Experts represent a structural breakthrough and a prime example of this institutional pragmatism. These specific programs are designed to explicitly bypass the traditional political credentials and the slow, standard nomenclatura pathways,
bypassing the usual rules entirely.
Their singular goal is to recruit top-tier scientific, technical, and entrepreneurial talent from around the exact world. Local organization departments are strictly mandated and heavily funded to attract these global experts. They completely sidestep the usual stringent requirements of long-term political loyalty or bureaucratic history in favor of pure, actionable, world-class competence.
It's an incredibly practical adaptation.
It demonstrates a profound institutional adaptability. The state ensures the nation maintains its critical economic and technological competitiveness by utilizing pure meritocratic principles exactly and exclusively where they are most critically needed, without disrupting the broader political stability of the general bureaucracy.
And this strategic application of meritocracy extends far beyond just recruiting top-tier quantum physicists. It is actually the fundamental mechanism for stabilizing the entire society. Meritocracy, or the carefully managed framework of it, functions as an immensely powerful tool for authoritarian co-optation.
This is perhaps the most sophisticated, profound aspect of the entire institutional architecture we are discussing today. The National Civil Service Examination, which millions of people like our graduate Wang take every year, is not merely a hiring tool to fill empty desks. It is a profound macro-sociological instrument of statecraft.
How does it function on that macro level?
In any society dealing with rapid growth and high inequality, the state must constantly manage the inherent tension between the established ruling elites and the vast masses. Traditional economic models often assume this tension is managed primarily through mass wealth redistribution, taxing the rich to placate the poor. However, an alternative, highly effective, and arguably more stable method is the distribution of upward mobility. By providing a credible, highly visible, rule-based ladder into the elite class, the state successfully co-opts the raw ambition and energy of the populace.
It is a psychological masterstroke. The NCSE distributes the perception of upward mobility on a massive societal scale. Let's look at the reality. The actual success rate of the NCSE is incredibly low. You have millions of intensely dedicated citizens competing for a tiny fraction of available positions. Statistically, almost everyone fails.
The math is brutal.
However, the undeniable, highly publicized existence of this open, standardized, merit-based pathway radically alters the psychological landscape of the entire citizenry. Think about the sheer energy required to study for these exams. By providing this pathway, the state successfully redirects public focus and frustration away from demanding systemic wealth redistribution or protesting structural inequalities, and channels the immense societal energy entirely toward intense, localized individual effort and educational achievement. If you fail, it is not the system's fault. It is because you simply didn't study hard enough.
The empirical data supporting this psychological dynamic is absolutely conclusive. Extensive sociological surveys, such as the Beijing College Students Panel Survey, which tracks the attitudes and beliefs of thousands of individuals over time, demonstrate the profound stabilizing impact of the NCSE's institutionalization.
The data reveals a clear correlation.
As the exam system became more entrenched, more transparent, and more definitively rule-based in a given province, a significantly higher percentage of college students began to view a career in the government as a highly viable, deeply desirable path. Most importantly, this measurable shift in perception and ambition was most pronounced among students without any existing political connections or elite family backgrounds.
For the students without the bloodline, without the deeply entrenched reciprocal networks of someone like Chen, the NCSE represents a genuine state-sponsored beacon of opportunity for socioeconomic advancement. They see a clear path. Score high, get the job.
It creates a powerful buy-in.
And the survey data shows something even more crucial for systemic stability. This deeply held belief in personal upward mobility directly correlates with a significantly diminished demand for income redistribution among those students. By committing vast resources to maintaining this meritocratic exam system, the state has successfully fostered a widespread, stabilizing popular belief that a citizen's destiny is entirely in their own hands.
Millions of citizens willingly and enthusiastically choose to devote the most energetic years of their lives to rigorous study and preparation for the exams, locked in their rooms, memorizing policy. This immense voluntary dedication of time, energy, and focus inherently and powerfully stabilizes the regime.
It creates a perfectly balanced, extraordinarily resilient organizational ecosystem. On one track, the informal networks, the internal placements within monopoly sectors, and the reciprocal horizontal exchanges between elites ensure the vital continuity, the deep loyalty, and the operational stability of the core administrative elite across multiple generations.
While the other track handles the broader populace.
Right. Simultaneously, on the parallel track, the vast, highly visible, strictly meritocratic apparatus of the NCSE continuously scans for and draws in the absolute brightest, most ambitious minds from the general populace. It co-opts their ambition, integrates their technical competence, and seamlessly weaves them into the broader state structure.
It is a dual-track system of elite formation that brilliantly, effectively synthesizes the ancient stabilizing imperatives of lineage and loyalty with the absolute modern necessity of technocratic competence and perceived societal fairness.
We have traced an incredible, continuous architecture of social hierarchy today. We started with the ancient Zongfa system and the rigid bloodline determinism of the Western Zoo 3,000 years ago. We followed that through the astounding 1,300-year reign of the imperial civil service exam, a system that fundamentally defined the civilization. We observed the catastrophic societal shock when that meritocratic pathway was abruptly severed in 1905, directly fueling the revolution that ended 2 millennia of imperial rule.
It's an unbroken thread of adaptation.
Moving into the modern era, we see these exact same historical forces dynamically interacting. We see the highly visible, meticulously standardized National Civil Service exam running in perfect synchronized parallel with sophisticated, quiet mechanisms of institutional networking and Radish recruitment. We see a massive system that relentlessly modernizes through global talent initiatives while simultaneously preserving its absolute core stability through the complete unification of politics and administration.
A civilization's stability is ultimately anchored not in the total eradication of hierarchy, but in its ability to continuously construct compelling architectures of ambition that convince every new generation their destiny is in their own hands, even as the ancient forces of lineage and legacy adapt quietly in the background.